Welcome back. This is another live event, and today we're going to be talking about Helichrysum oil. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining me last week also, where we were talking about the Jatamansi from Bhutan. I know that a lot of you have been enjoying that and sending some nice comments. So, all right, so we have Helichrysum, and here it is, and this is one of the most important essential oils in the world. And the reason for that is because it is in the category of oils that always do, or almost always do, what they are reputed to do. And the Jatamansi does that at a psychoactive level, and the Helichrysum does that at a cellular level. So I have a long relationship with Helichrysum oil, and this is a very interesting aspect of working in the field of botanical medicine. And this is that over time we develop an intimate knowledge of a particular plant because we use it a lot. And then we might go and learn about where it grows, and we might participate in its cultivation or its harvesting or its distillation. And I have done all of these things with Helichrysum. I've made 2 trips to Corsica and met many distillers there and actually participated in the process of harvesting the wild Helichrysum and the cultivated Helichrysum, and participated in the distillation process as well. So I've seen the whole cycle of the plant, and this has given me a really nice personal personal relationship with it. So now, when I smell the fragrance of Helichrysum oil, all of those emotional memories come back because the fragrance connects me directly to the Mediterranean. And so this is one of the things that's very nice about doing aromatherapy, is that fragrance is so connected to our emotional memories especially. This is one of the ways that it works, actually, is to help us to have pleasant feelings, pleasant memories. So one of the things that we can do when we are doing aromatherapy is we can use any fragrance to connect with its environmental energies and elements of where the plant came from and the energies and elements that the plant has in it. So when we're talking about Helichrysum, we're talking about an essential oil that comes from the Mediterranean. And if you know where it comes from, and especially if you get the really top-grade Corsican Helichrysum, then you will be smelling some very unique elements, because the Helichrysum from Corsica especially is actually really different chemically than other areas in the Mediterranean. And this is because of the soil. And so you can actually take a moment and inhale and make a connection then with the earth element that's in this oil, and that's part of its healing power. And you can also make a connection to the solar energy that's in there, which is also part of its healing power, because the sunlight is very intense in the areas where this comes from, especially on Corsica. But you can also smell the freshness of the air and the purity of the water. So these are things that are inherent in every essential oil, but as we make a personal connection to a plant, then we become more conscious of these energies and elements that are cosmological, actually. These are part of what we would call the eco-physiology of the plant. Now, the eco-physiology of Helichrysum is very important because where it comes from plays a very big role in its therapeutic power. And so the Corsican Helichrysum is reputed to be the best in terms of its healing powers, but it is also being cultivated all over the Mediterranean areas now. And those oils are all good as well. So I mentioned at the beginning that Helichrysum is in the category of doing one of the oils that always or almost always does what it is reputed to do. So what is it reputed to do? Well, it's reputed to have great healing powers for the tissues. It is a great medicine, a miraculous essential oil actually, for injuries. And of course it came into the public awareness because it has a lot of regenerative effects for the skin. So this is an interesting story of how this happened. You know, there's a lot of misconceptions about how long distillation has been happening and how long essential oils have been around. There's been a lot of, I guess you could say, sort of fanciful, sort of imaginary stories that have been made up for marketing purposes about how essential oils have been around since the time of Jesus and all of this. Now, aromatic plants and their preparations have definitely been around for thousands and thousands of years. They're probably some of the first medicines that humans actually made, was taking the aromatic plants and putting them into some kind of oil or tea or something like this, and using them externally. The whole story that essential oils have been around for thousands of years is not correct. The distillation of essential oils did start about 1,000 years ago, but it was extremely limited. It wasn't widely available. There was, a few things that happened here and there, and not like there were essential oils everywhere for everybody. There were the aromatic plants and their preparations. Now, that changed about 500 years ago. Some plants started to become distilled on a larger scale, and what we can say is that things like lavender being distilled in France, that goes back a couple centuries, all right? But in general, it was not widespread. Now, Helichrysum's an interesting story that way, because Helichrysum has only really come out on the market in the last 20 or 30 years at the most, all right? And it's a new essential oil, and its value has only recently been recognized. So it does have a historical background as far as the aromatic plant, and this is something that we frequently find, is that an essential oil actually does have a history of being used for something, but in its original plant form. And this is, in the case of Helichrysum, it wasn't even widely used in folk medicine. A lot of aromatic plants do go back centuries and centuries in folk medicine, but Helichrysum as an essential oil really just came out recently. Now, in folk medicine, Helichrysum was not widely used either, and it's interesting that the early use of Helichrysum was actually by shepherds, who would take the flowers and make a poultice and put them on their animals, on the sheep and the goats, when they had injuries. And so we have an early indicator of what Helichrysum is used for. So the original use was actually for veterinary medicine by the shepherds on the island of Corsica specifically, but around the Mediterranean region. Now, the appearance of Helichrysum essential oil is a very interesting story. There was some distillation of it happening, very small scale. It was being used as a flavoring additive, actually, for tobacco. And, essential oils can be used for flavoring and fragrancing. So it was around, but it wasn't recognized for its healing powers. And I actually met the gentleman on Corsica who is responsible for bringing Helichrysum out on a large scale. And he was approached by the owner of a famous cosmetic company, L'Occitane from France. And this gentleman talked to Albrecht, the distiller, and said, "We're really interested in researching this oil." So he took a liter of the Helichrysum oil, and they did analysis and they did testing and so forth. And he came back a year later and he said, "This oil has remarkable skin healing powers." And that's what started the Helichrysum business. So first, what happened was that there was a gigantic demand for the wild Helichrysum on the island of Corsica. And it got even a little bit like the Wild West and competitive, and sometimes I heard rumors that there were even some, sort of mafioso elements involved in it. But the wild Helichrysum was gradually replaced. It's still harvested, still distilled, and is still considered the best, actually. But because the demand was so large, and what happened was that the plantations started to come up, and now the majority of the oil is coming from plantations, which is considered to be slightly different. And then it spread from Corsica to other areas, especially the Balkan region. And now there are plantations all over that area. And this, of course, has made the oil very accessible, which has helped to bring down the price and made it much more accessible. But it has also changed the chemistry a bit. That's one of the things that we learn with essential oils, is that many times the wild plants are a lot stronger, but they are frequently complicated in terms of the sustainability issues. So that's a little bit of background about Helichrysum, historically and culturally. And now what I'd like to tell you are some of the therapeutics, because that's really what Helichrysum is about. So when we talk about Helichrysum doing something repeatedly and predictably, we say, well, what does it do? What it's really about is healing injuries, healing soft tissue injury and trauma. And so that is anything that causes pain, swelling, bruising, congestion. All right, that's where we immediately think of Helichrysum. And the way that it works is that when it is applied over an injury, it improves the circulation. So in Chinese medical terms, we would say that it resolves blood stasis, blood stagnation, that it has a blood vitalizing kind of effect. It moves the qi in the blood. And what is now known is that it creates oxygenation through the capillary beds around an injury. So what that does is it basically causes accelerated healing of soft tissue injuries with bruising and swelling and edema. And that, of course, reduces the pain. And so therefore, this oil, if we want to think of it in terms of energies and elements, what we're doing is we're putting qi and prana onto an area that's stagnant, and that qi and prana is causing the blood to move, all right? And so that's how we think of Helichrysum. And because of this, it is considered to be one of the most reliable essential oils to actually use for this purpose. Now that's what it's famous for in terms of medical treatment, but then of course it's also famous in terms of skin treatment. And skin treatment, what is known about it is that it has a protective effect for the skin, and it has a rejuvenative effect on the skin in general. So it's considered, you know, a beauty oil, and it goes into countless products now. It goes into nice carrier oils, and one of my favorite combinations, actually, it's really simple to do, is just a combination of rosehip seed oil with Helichrysum essential oil in it, and anybody can make that blend. We have it over at Floricopia. It's called the flower of the sun, because that's what Helichrysum is named after. It's named after Helios and Chrysum, and Helios is the sunlight, and Chrysum is gold, and so the flowers are the gold of the sunlight. That's why it's called Helichrysum. But also the application for the skin can be applied directly. It goes into lots of different formulas. I'll give you a few recipes here in just a second. But it's really safe. It's an essential oil that has virtually no dermotoxic potential. And this is a really big advantage of using this essential oil. There's so many essential oils where people actually get injured from them, you know, from using them, because they were told that, oh, it's okay to put it directly on the skin and so forth, but it's really not. And there's a high risk of dermotoxicity, and that is not detox, by the way. It is not detox when you burn yourself. So Helichrysum, on the other hand, is very, very safe. It's very safe for the skin and can be applied directly, undiluted. It can be done that way almost always safely. Some people actually do have a little bit of sensitivity sometimes if you use too much for too long and your skin is really sensitive. But for the most part, Helichrysum is a very safe kind of oil. So you can blend it with all types of other things. You can put it on undiluted. And let me just go ahead and skip over here to some of the recipes that you might like to know about. Actually, you may have heard that lavender is a really good oil for burns. And that, for the most part, is true, especially if you have a really high quality essential oil and you dilute it correctly. It can be good for burns. But Helichrysum oil is also right up there, if not actually better. So Helichrysum oil is very good, and it is also used for a lot of things other than this injury and swelling and bruising and skin regeneration. I wanted to tell you that there is a spiritual dimension to this oil, which I learned from the harvesters, the cultivators and the distillers. It's kind of like this little internal secret use that they talk about a lot. I'll come back to these formulas in just a second. I wanted to share this little spiritual dimension with you. And they say, these growers, harvesters, and distillers who are in contact with the plant for extended periods of time when they're harvesting it and then they're handling the oil and they're around this, they say that it has very psychoactive properties also. And it is considered a deeply spiritual kind of essential oil in terms of its effect on our psyche. What the consistent report is that when you are around the plants and you are working with the oil and breathing it quite a bit, which we can do in a kind of contemplative aromatherapy, we can actually just sit and breathe the oil repeatedly. It's quite safe for that. Inhale 2 or 3 times and pause and relax and meditate. Inhale 2 or 3 times, pause and meditate, like that. And what people report is that it has a very deeply relaxing effect and deeply euphoric kind of effect, and that it also has a psychoactive effect that then reaches into the dream state. Now, last week I told you about how Jatamansi affects our sleep and how it affects the dreams. And it appears that Helichrysum works in a similar kind of way, and that if we actually inhale it for a period of time, then it will affect our sleep and it will affect our dreams. And again, the report is that it releases stagnation out of the subconscious. It releases traumatic memories. But some of these distillers actually took that story a step further, and they said that this plant actually supports a person's spiritual, emotional growth. All right. And in that sense, we could classify Helichrysum into a category with other plants that have been used for spiritual purposes for millennia that could be considered or called wish-fulfilling gems. They are plants that help us to become more spiritually refined, more spiritually mature, more spiritually experienced. They give us wisdom, actually. They give us wisdom, they cultivate compassion by healing inner pain that has been stored in our psyche or in the nervous system for a long period of time that makes us, behave irritably and maybe overreact to circumstances. So apparently Helichrysum, if we develop a deep relationship with it, does have some kind of spiritual healing kinds of powers as well. So I wanted to mention that. I have heard people, besides these cultivators and these distillers, I've heard people confirm this, that there's something very magical about it. So we think of Helichrysum as an oil that's very safe and very easy to use directly on the skin or in a carrier oil, and a standard dilution for a carrier oil is maybe just a teaspoon of a nice oil, and it can be virtually anything. But with Helichrysum, you don't want it to have a strong fragrance, so you can actually enjoy the fragrance of the oil. So it could be the rosehip seed, which has a little bit of fragrance. It could be almond oil. It could be coconut oil that the fractionated coconut that doesn't have strong fragrance. But it's okay to put it in a medicated oil that's heavier also. So it has a wide range of functions, and this is a good opportunity here to just kind of fill out your understanding of it, because I know people tend to hear about things in a certain narrow range. But it is good for a wide range of skin conditions. All right, we can start with that. It's not just good. It's not just good for injuries, bruising and stagnation and pain. You sprain your ankle, you just start putting it on. It can have a real miraculous effect on speeding the healing time, reducing the healing time, accelerating it. And for skin conditions, it can be applied directly on on acne. It can be part of a treatment plan, and here we can also think in terms of the hydrosol, all right, because the hydrosol is far less expensive, and people can just mist that directly on their face, and it has the therapeutic benefits. But Helichrysum also has this calming and relaxing effect on the nervous system, and so you can also use it for that particular purpose. You can just put a couple drops on the palms and inhale it to have an immediate calmative effect on anxiety, restlessness. And Helichrysum is also a major herb and essential oil for respiratory conditions, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. You can put Helichrysum directly on the chest and cover with a hot, wet compress for cough, colds, flus. And it's relaxing, antispasmodic, calming to the nervous system, which is always helpful for relaxing coughing and respiratory congestion and spasms. And it is also good. If we go through the list of things that it's good for on the skin, it gets very long. Okay, scars, this is something I forgot to mention. Scar tissue can be dissolved by applying Helichrysum oil on it regularly, undiluted. And this is especially pronounced if you do acupuncture on the scar tissue as well. There's actually an acupuncture technique. It's called a plum blossom needle. It's got a little handle, and it's got these little needles, a head with several small needles, and you just tap this hammer on the skin, and it stimulates the skin. Okay, and it's that stimulation that brings the circulation into the scar tissue, which is doing the same thing physically that the Helichrysum does biochemically. So then what you can do is you can use external stimulation, either needling the scar tissue directly or using that little tapping hammer, or anything, massage that just brings the circulation in, and then apply the Helichrysum over the scar tissue. And I have seen it dissolve scar tissue. Definitely, it will reduce it. It will also speed up healing of new wounds as well. So this is something that I've heard many testimonials about. As soon as the sutures come out, go ahead and start putting it on there. All right, for any kind of laceration, post-surgical things. I've seen many cases, heard lots of testimonials about how quickly the wound heals up. And then also it can be used for eczema and psoriasis. And again, just to mention it, rosehip seed oil I think is one of the best. But you can use any of the therapeutic oils, kukui nut and things like that. Marula oil is nice. There's a whole range of carrier oils that go really well with Helichrysum. Let's see, what else? So with the scar tissue, I'll just mention that a nice combination is Helichrysum and frankincense and carrot seed oil. Those three go together really well because frankincense also has some similar kinds of effects in terms of scar tissue healing and in terms of moving the qi and blood through an injured and stagnant area. Helichrysum also has significant anti-inflammatory powers, and we can enhance that with something like the blue chamomile, okay, the German chamomile, And recipe is totally flexible. It can be half and half or any particular ratio that you want. It's not even that important because both of those oils are very safe. You can put the Helichrysum on and then just leave it. You can put the chamomile on a little bit later. You can alternate, you can rotate through it. It's very, all of these oils that I'm talking about here are very mild. It's not like we have to be concerned about phototoxicity like with bergamot or, you know, some skin burning, putting cinnamon oil on. So those are just a few things that come to mind here. And let me see if it looks like some questions are coming in. And I'll just pause here for a moment, do some questions, and that'll give me some more things to talk about. And okay, so here's a good one. I've had this question come in several times actually. Would it be healing for vitiligo and loss of melanin produced in the skin? Well, this is actually an autoimmune condition. And there are some things that are talked about for treatment, and it depends on how extensive it is and how acute and chronic it is, whether it would respond to natural treatment. And I would say that this is one ingredient that you would like to have in your pharmacy for treating this. There's a number of other things that I have heard about over the years, but quite honestly, I haven't worked with anybody for an extended period of time. I have had several consultations with people, and I have suggested some long-term possibilities for them, but I can't say as a clinician that, oh, I have actually seen this improve this particular condition. So this is something, it's very individual, like most of these kind of conditions where the body is attacking itself. It depends on a lot of factors, but what I can say is Helichrysum is definitely in that little home pharmacy, along with frankincense, rosehip seed oil, many of these types of things. Can you use Helichrysum for migraines? Yes, I have heard several testimonials from people that you can actually just apply a couple of drops to the temples, and for some people it seems to really be a real remedy. It seems to actually really work. But that's very individual also. You see, a lot of these things in herbal medicine or even allopathic medicine, something is supposed to work, it's supposed to do something, but it doesn't. And that's because there are so many types of migraines, for example. And sometimes it's triggered by weather, and sometimes it's triggered by sugar, and sometimes it's triggered by stress, and sometimes it's triggered by hormones. And so it really depends on each individual. But what I can say is try it, because it's completely benign, completely harmless. And I have heard some people say that this is the cure for them, that if they put it on undiluted, just a couple drops on the temples or just breathe it, that can have a miraculous effect on stopping the migraine. And just thinking out loud here, one of the things that you could combine it with in terms of herbal medicine is take a strong dose of ginger right at the same time. And for some people that also does it. So that combination of two things, herbs and essential oils, you may want to just take like a half a teaspoon of fresh chopped ginger and just put it in your mouth and chew on it. Sometimes for some people, that big blast of spiciness has an effect on the cerebral circulation, because the dilation of the arteries in the brain is apparently a very big part of this mystery of migraines. But sometimes just bringing this kind of spice activation in can also stop a migraine. So that might be something that you can try. This is all in the area of safe but experimental herbal medicine, because really there's so many variables. You just say migraine, is there something that we can just say, oh, it treats migraine? Well, a lot of factors. All right, so here's another one. I can mix chamomile with Helichrysum and put directly on a scar without carrier oil. Yes, now chamomile is actually more anti-inflammatory. So you would like to think of the helichrysum and the chamomile maybe for the eczema in a carrier oil with rosehip seed. So my recommendation for scar tissue is half and half helichrysum and frankincense. All right, that's what I have recommended, along with the acupuncture stimulation. And I can definitely say from clinical practice over the years that you can dissolve scar tissue. And again, it depends on the case and the seriousness of it. But I can tell you a case history. A gentleman who came in and he was having nerve impingement issues in his hand, kind of a carpal tunnel type of situation because of scar tissue higher up on the arm. And it was major scar tissue in the upper arm. And it was affecting the circulation. And scar tissue will do that. Scar tissue will cause downstream kinds of problems. So we worked on the scar tissue using the technique that I described, and the scar tissue began to dissolve and flatten out and sort of, become less bundled together. And as the scar tissue began to dissolve over time, this was several months, the nerve impingement in the wrist and hand was correspondingly decreased. All right, so that was a real success story. And what I did was I gave him the oils and I gave him the needles and trained him how to do the treatment himself at home, because it's something you have to do on a daily basis. So somebody is asking, well, what does that over time mean? 4 weeks or 4 months? Yeah, maybe 4 years. I mean, a lot of these things, we have to really, it's too individual, to be able to say, well, use this for this amount of time and it will be resolved. Because sometimes it can resolve very quickly if it's not complicated. And then, of course, the longer an injury has been around, chronic injuries, helichrysum, chronic scar tissue, old scar tissue, but also new injuries and new scar tissue. Helichrysum will address all of these, but how long is dependent on many factors. It depends on how serious it is, it depends on how long you've had it, and it depends on how much you can do for it, you see, because this is a big consideration that a lot of people don't think about, is that we have to work on health conditions on many, many levels in order to really move them forward quickly. We have to work at the nutritional level with the diet, we have to work on the nervous system with relaxation, we have to work on movement, exercise, and oxygenation through breathing, and then we have to work frequently with a full herbal pharmacy, you see, that is individualized. And so, I'll just mention, I mention it every week, so I'll just go ahead and mention it here, that if you have personal medical questions, that I am available, that I do consultations through my telemedicine site, and that is crowconsultations.com. And I'll also mention that the Helichrysum is now part of our bestsellers sale that's going on over Floricopia. And also, I want to say thank you to all of you who purchased the Bhutanese Jaramanzi last week. And I'm not sure if we have any left, but it's probably not much if there is. So I think that shipment pretty much went out the door right away because of your excitement and enthusiasm. I hope that all of you are getting really wonderful results from that. And I have heard that some people are. I'll mention also, since I'm talking about some other topics, that next week I'm going to be meeting with a gentleman. I'm going to have a guest here on this live event. And this is a gentleman from Oman who's an expert in frankincense. So we're going to be talking about frankincense and some of the special grades of frankincense that do unique types of things. And he has a very mystical relationship to the tree and to the resin. So let's see what else is here. Okay, what is the best way to use it for an injury? Just put it directly on. You can use it with a compress, you can use it with a carrier oil, and it's virtually harmless. That's one of the beautiful things about it. It's virtually harmless. Is it similar to Arnica? Good, excellent observation. Arnica oil as a carrier and Helichrysum together go perfectly. And Arnica actually is pretty much therapeutically in the same category as what Helichrysum does, which is that it is a blood vitalizing activator of prana and chi and fluids. So Arnica, the flowers are macerated in olive oil. That's a classic Western type of herbal infusion. And that's done with calendula flowers, and it's done with St. John's wort flowers, and it's done with arnica flowers. Primarily, those are the three herbs that are frequently found in Western herbology. And arnica is specifically for bruising, for injuries, soft tissue injuries, pain, and so forth. And so thank you for bringing that up, reminding me as an astute observation that arnica infused carrier oil, which is typically olive oil, arnica macerated in olive oil, is the Western perfect combination in Western herbology. And so again, what you can do, Helichrysum, the ratio in a carrier oil is very, very flexible because it's so safe. So you could take a teaspoon of that arnica oil or arnica gel. It comes in lots of different forms. And in a teaspoon, you can easily put 5 or 10 drops of Helichrysum essential oil in that and then put that over the injury. Okay, does it work for adult acne? Well, again, it is the kind of situation where sometimes it could be the remedy, and it could be very simple. You could just take Helichrysum hydrosol and you could mist your face, and you could find that that starts to have a really positive effect. Or you could take a warm compress and you could put a few drops of Helichrysum essential oil on it and then use that just as a compress on the face, and it may have really dramatic positive effects. It certainly will not be harmful or aggravating to do that, but a lot of times you also have to address the underlying conditions, and this has to do a lot of times with the hormonal system, or it may have to do with detoxification of the digestive tract and so forth. So again, the more holistically we think and the more we work on different aspects together, the better the results are. All right, what's the best way to incorporate the oil into a skincare routine? Well, we actually have so many skincare products that are based on Helichrysum. That would be the easy way to do it. You can just go ahead and check out some of our skincare products, and you'll see that the word immortel is all over all of our products. And that's the common name for Helichrysum, immortel. And the reason for that is because at the end of the summer, the flowers are still blooming, and then they stay dry all winter. And so even though the plant has died back, it still has some flowers that are there all winter. Okay, so we also, like I said, we're having our best sellers event happening over there. And then we're going to be having our end of summer sale coming up. So I just want to mention all of that. And again, thank you for being here on this live event. I hope you found it helpful. There's so much more that I could tell you about Helichrysum, but I think these are some good practical points. And so enjoy the oil, check out the products, have a wonderful week. See you next week, and we'll be talking about frankincense.